You're with Julian on the Brown Note on what to do with the problem like Jamie. So, Adolescence is the lightning rod, not as the right wing are trying to say online at the moment, where they're race swapping a black killer for a white boy. It has nothing to do with that. It's about the toxic online spaces that are having a very negative impact on teenagers and adolescent boys and training them into becoming incredibly toxic misogynists. The manosphere, or the Tate world, based around Owen Cooper, a never-before actor who plays Jamie Miller, a 13-year-old boy who's as meek and mild as they come, who ends up murdering his female classmate, and peels back a window on this world of spaces where young men are worthless and predatory people like Tate and so on try and use that to their advantage to make money out of them, but also create this entire new parenting that's happening outside of the view of the parents, and very, very bad parenting. So the show itself doesn't offer solutions. It points a spotlight at this world. So it doesn't offer solutions. So I'm going to try and engage with what do we do when it's made very clear that the adult world is completely disconnected from this particular generation of teenagers. So we hear very early on about one of the police detective's sons, who's at the same school as Jamie, talks about the manosphere and about how they've got what they thought was a positive interaction online completely upside down, because they don't even understand the colour of emojis and stuff like that. They're completely ill-equipped to deal with it. And the fact that there are people online who make a lot of money out of preying on these young people and whipping up a very anti-women sentiment, and also a very unhealthy emotional and relationship view of young men, what they expect from women, and also the extremely unhealthy manner they view relationships, and also the status they apply to those relationships. The impact on young women is obviously just as huge. It's not part of the adolescent story per se. It's really about the young boys. So that's what I'm going to really focus on here, even though the impact on young girls is terrifying. It's also more the other way around, that the young girls are the victims of the training, the boot camp training that's been given to these kids. There's online spaces now that are completely adrift from any kind of oversight from parenting at all. And we are allowing the worst parents in the world to enter people's bedrooms and train the children to become young men. And we don't have any, we don't know it's happening, and we kind of know now, but we don't have anything to equip ourselves with dealing with it. It's almost impossible to stop. We have got a highly pornographized society when it comes to what young men see about sex and relationships, where women are reduced to items, and also the enemy. It's them withholding something from you if you're a young man. And there's a demonization of young women and removing the identity from them as human beings, making them into a trophy or an enemy. And it's losing an entire generation of young men to bad faith actors like Tate. And crucially, at adolescence, at a point when they've left childhood and are developing into an adult, they're developing into it with these guide rails being provided by the worst people on earth. Part of the process is very much anti-men. There's no way that you can sell people things that they don't desperately want. You have to make young men feel worthless. And part of this process from the Andrew Tate world is to make young men, and in the manosphere, feel worthless. The 80-20 rule, where they tell ingrain it into these children that there's never going to be a girlfriend for them unless they're one of the top 20 alpha males in their class. Then you have to learn all these techniques. You have to manipulate a girl to get her to go out with you. And that the girl themselves are a worthless proposition. She's just status for you. We had Andrew Tate recently saying about if you've only got kids by one woman, then you are useless because you should have a harem of them out there producing kids for you. An instruction manual that is as toxic as it could possibly get at crucially the worst point in that young man's life. So once they feel worthless, then you've got them. You say that you're on their side and that you can actually teach them how to overcome a problem that you have shown them exists in the first place, which is that you're worthless and will never get a girlfriend because women are shit and you need to employ all these tactics I'm going to teach you, and they become beholden to this ideology online. And it's not just Andrew Tate, it's very wide and it spreads out across various aspects of misogynistic online culture. And the other part about being online is you've got the freedom to express a very repugnant view with no consequences often. We see at one point in the very first episode of Adolescence, the cop saying, you like these girls on Instagram because you've posted under them. But then mentions that's quite an abusive thing to say, isn't it? So they're in an environment where if they were in public, they'd never ever get away with talking about people like that. But because they're in this very enclosed bubble that neither their parents nor any other adults are seeing, they can be more extreme in their language and express themselves a bit more fully and get away with it. Another very important part of the show is to say that the parents are not to blame for this paradigm existing at all. They did not create this online bubble where young men first get taught to feel worthless and then get taught to be toxic. It's a new paradigm. We aren't equipped for it. We're dealing with a generation that has the highest levels of mental health and anxiety problems in recorded history. I did a piece years ago on this show about really tragic things like the number of people applying to do their driving test at school in America is at its lowest. The number of people going on a date is at its lowest through anxiety. They're scared of everything. And you can say it's helicopter parenting that led to this and so on. But in honesty, the world is also a complete steaming pile of crap. It has been terrifying for years now. You only have to open a newspaper and see how much worse everything continually gets. These kids grow up under they've never not known the spectre of climate change. And being younger, they're probably much cleverer in understanding that it is completely real and terrifying and that the adults aren't doing anything about it. There are many aspects of it. The complete change in the economic prospects of young people now. Like there's a hopelessness because when you were, 50 years ago, if you had a low paying job, you had your own home and you had a wife and you had kids, and now you've got no hope of anything at all. Why even bother going to work? All you're going to do is barely afford to pay rent to somebody else. Their future horizon has shrunk. And it's a terrifying world where very, very bad people get elevated to the highest office all of the time. What possible hope could they have for the future? So this has instilled, yes, there's been really bad helicopter parenting, not letting your kids out at night and so on, but no generation had to deal with the internet like this one. This is an entirely new world. You don't have your peer group at school. If you're a chick, you don't look at the prettiest girl in class as your peer. You look at 200 different girls on Instagram every single day that are fake and beautified, and that's your peer group. You don't suffer bullying while you're in class, it follows you up the stairs into your bedroom and has a go at you all night. And it's not just a few kids at school bullying you, it's often hundreds of kids as you're spread over the internet. And they're not equipped at that age to have the maturity to deal with these very, very aggressive problems. The parents are in some way responsible for creating part of this world, but no one knew what the impact of Facebook would be or what any of these things would be. It's a brand new paradigm, and it's existed out of the sight of the parents as well. There is virtually no way of banning things. Banning things just doesn't work. And knee-jerk responses as well. I mean, if you see people on the right and they see a knife crime in London, all they have to offer is, well, we need to put the kids in jail for longer. That's never worked in human history. You think a 13-year-old is cognitively able to fully understand the impacts on his entire life because he's carrying a knife, or in that particular moment was able to control what was happening? There's no banning of the internet. And punishing doesn't work. And it's not addressing the problem. And a one-size response to social issues does not work. And that's a classic example of saying punish the criminals more. If a crime is a society-wide crime, or sorry, not even a crime, but if a problem is a society-wide problem, it requires a 360-degree solution involving multiple elements. You don't say, well, if a kid's guilty of a knife crime, or if a kid's guilty of being abusive to one of his female classmates, you punish them harder. Because that doesn't address all of the other things that are happening at all. And those people aren't able to process what the ramifications of what they're doing are. I think one of the best policies that I've seen with regards not to banning per se, but to having some kind of accountability on this whole thing is in Australia, the Albanese government has proposed banning social media access for people under the age of 16. I think this is a great policy. The naysayers will say anything at all to stop it happening. But like, oh, YouTube isn't included. Doesn't matter. They'll say, oh, the kids will still get access. Doesn't matter. Sure, the kids that are accessing this social media content now will indeed probably circumvent the process. What's important is that each year after that, we'll do it less so, until the point where it isn't the only defining characteristic of worth they have is their online identity. Because less and less will come up through that filter. And even if they do come up through that filter, it will happen later, when they might have matured more and have more of an ability to have perspective on what's going on. It gives them breathing space when they're at that pivotal point where they're not suddenly having replacement parents who are the worst people on earth. Another element I thought would be good is making the companies accountable for the spaces. So I don't believe, the usage of carriage services, you have to blame the telephone if someone phones up and says they're going to kill you. That's garbage. But they have created an environment where there is, it is an offence to make a threat over a phone call. So these massive companies are just reaping money in, knowing full well that the spaces being used by the younger people are extremely detrimental. If we can elevate the age at which they can access these Snapchat, Instagram, any of these forces that have become extremely toxic to them, at least there's some breathing space, at least less people are doing it, and make the companies accountable, particularly when it comes to algorithms. So we have seen with the elevation of Trump that people like Facebook were never our friends. They would sell us out in a heartbeat. But they, due to perpetual growth, have made themselves wholly accountable to generating more and more revenue each year using algorithms to direct content. Hold them accountable for these algorithms, where they're used and how. You could even look up a story that is anti-Andrew Tate online, and the next 10 recommendations will be pro-Andrew Tate. They thrive off of recommending content that might be considered terrible for children. So go after their algorithms. What are you feeding these kids? Don't let them use a service until they're 16, and make sure that algorithms are better, not just solely designed to drive advertising revenue by providing more and more offensive content. Education. Make part of the curriculum at schools now an investigation into this throughout that whole path through secondary school. From when they're 10 or 11 until when they're 16, make it a complete class, a complete subject, where teachers who know what they're talking about are walking through what's happening to these kids in real time. And where the kids can voice their expressions as to what's happening and listen to that and get feedback from it about why they feel like they do and about what kind of forces are shaping them online. Make it a two-way conversation and make it a subject at school. This goes to the point of equipping the kids with more knowledge, so that when they do encounter these very dark forces online, at least they're aware of the fact that it's coming, and also aware of what the intent of the people saying it is. Ask them why they feel this way. Why do they feel so worthless? Why do they have such a lack of identity? Ask them how, teach them how to cope. They're not old enough to have learnt coping mechanisms at 13 to deal with these very, very dark forces. So give them some. Tell them how they're being manipulated by people like Tate. Manage their expectations on what they're seeing someone like Andrew Tate in a Learjet with, hot chicks around him. Manage their expectations and teach them the fallacy of certain expectations. The only way that they can rate themselves as good or cool or successful is what someone like Andrew Tate is showing them that to be. Show them that it isn't that, and that's garbage. Manage what their expectations are, and I think if you teach any of these kids that have fallen down these rabbit holes self-worth, they wouldn't have fallen down them in the first place. They are taught to feel worthless by these bad faith actors. Examine the current role models they have outside of these spaces, where there are very toxic people that are probably in legitimate politics, if that is even a word, or on TV, or being role models from them. What are they getting out of these people, and what are these people offering them that are very bad? There's a direct link to the manosphere and a lot of the politicians that are currently in power in America. What kind of role model does that give you? You would feel hopeless. You'd feel, a smart kid would say, these people are idiots and horrible, and yet they're the most successful people out there with the best looking wives. Think about how bad, think about, say, Andrew Tate was in your town and he hired a hall in your town centre, 7:30 for 2 hours every weeknight. Would you let your 13-year-old go to that? Absolutely no one on earth would. But you are. Everyone is. It's happening. And it's not a hall with 200 13-year-olds in, it's a hall with several million teenagers in. We understand the difference between our generation and that generation. We were already adults by the time these forces came into play on our lives. We had the coping mechanisms and the maturity to deal with it, and still some of us are complete idiots. The kids have never known a world different. This is their adolescence. It's online. The first time that it has been online fully for a generation. We didn't know it was coming and we don't know how to deal with it. But we also don't know what the impacts are until they're coming through in very dark ways. Teach these kids resilience. A lot of them are so bound by anxiety and the modern mental health crisis that they don't have any resilience or coping mechanisms with things. They just shut down. And give them perspective. Obviously, one of the worst things that happens when you're an adolescent is that you regard anything that's happening to you at that point as being your entire life. Teach them perspective on how it isn't your entire life. It just feels really bad today. And that there are opportunities in a wave of young people committing suicide. That today is one thing, but ultimately a lot of people yelling at you online shouldn't actually have that much impact on you. It is like the Wizard of Oz. It's like if someone stepped out from behind the curtain, you'd see that it was all a fallacy, but give them the perspective and the resilience to weather this storm. And I think finally, shows like Adolescence are really good. You could branch this out. You could have shows that don't focus on the criminal justice system. Ironically, I think that the criminal justice show, the original one from the UK, were quite relatable in the fact that they show the impacts of the legal system in very intelligent ways. But don't make it about an individual committing a crime so much as a society-wide problem. You could easily make Adolescence 2 and focus on the girls in the class and how they're treated and what the impacts and expectations are on those. So having this media dialogue, this one TV show has opened up more dialogue on the toxic abuse of young boys online and the formation of future aggressive misogynists than anything else that's happened in the last 10 years that I've seen.